So we are very excited for the second episode of Real Talk for this year. So our guest that we have is William Washington III. He's really going to bring real talk, bring real life situations to share with you his journey. The power of hope is what I took away that you're going to hear from this conversation. He's really going to go below the surface and what makes him stand out, we feel, from other leaders in the epiphany moments he had of what makes him the way he is, and also why he believes so much in the power of connection and lifting others up. EJ, what about you?
Yeah, no, I mean, William has this incredibly high impact role as a global CFO, but he shows up, he has this incredible way of bringing his clear sense of purpose and his authenticity and that realness into that role and driving so much impact. So you'll hear how he does that, how he motivates his team, how he builds that sense of shared compelling purpose across all of the folks that he leads and how he finds that next generation leader and kind of helps with that development. So as well as mental fitness and bringing all of those elements into his day to day so that he can give his best on a consistent basis. Really a great conversation, great storytelling, and I'm sure this is one that will leave you with lots to think about as you plan out your strategy for the rest of the year.
All right, let's dive in.
Are you ready to dive deep into meaningful discussions, explore personal stories, and gain practical insights that can transform your approach to mental fitness? Well, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Real Talk Mental Fitness Podcast, where open conversation and authentic connections come together to empower your mental well-being. I'm your host, Chinazom.
And I'm your co-host, EJ.
And I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
No, I'm excited about the conversation. I tell people anytime I get an opportunity to share my story or to help others, and there's been so many epiphany moments, but
Okay.
I think one of the bigger, grander ones is you go through the journey of life. And I often tell people my life it's just my life, right? It's just the thing I lived. It's not something I saw in a movie. It's not something saw on a TV show. I didn't hear it on a radio. I didn't read it in a book. It's my life. It's a part of me. It's who I am. And I say that because everything I lived is a part of my lived experience. And it wasn't until I became a global CFO that people are like, oh, tell us about the path to leadership and about the path to CFO. Because when you're on the journey, you don't really know where it's going to end. And I was really just reacting to circumstances, making choices that seemed to be the right choice.
Mm.
And I'm very blessed and feel very grateful for the opportunity life has given me. But I wouldn't call it the perfect pathway, but it was a perfect pathway for me. So, and if it helps somebody, especially the younger generation, and I have four kids myself who have
Oh,
their own moments of success and failures. And I'm very thankful that if my life had been perfect, I wouldn't have anything to share with them and
mm,
anything to tell them. And so when they hit their own roadblocks, I'm able to tell them the two or three things that I did to help kind of shift my course and put me on track to CFO. So, it's just a great opportunity. And unfortunately, you find that in order to touch people and reach people, you often have to do a podcast or mentor somebody or talk to someone. I wish I could be like Martin Luther King and just line everybody up on the Washington Mall and talk to 100,000 at one time, even if it only helped one person, right? Because
yeah.
you never know who that person is that needs help. And I remember when I needed help the most, it was really hard to find that inspiration and that thing to keep me going.
Mm.
I feel very just, I, I didn't have one mentor or one thing that kind of changed everything. It was really just kind of a series of events that kind of led me to where I am.
Mm.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, the point you make about, it's a journey and you don't typically know where you're going to end up. And folks don't ask you, hey, what are you learning until you get to a milestone, right? And then people are like, there must be a method to that person's madness. Something
Yeah,
doing is
absolutely.
working, even if that working is imperfect, right? So it's like, it's interesting that that's just how we're wired as human beings. And I know you said there isn't like one specific conversation or experience or person, but was there anything that stands out for you when you look back that you feel if you could talk to that one person in the audience, like what was that thing for you?
Yeah, I think, let me try to pick out a couple moments and we can see if there's one thing that sticks out. I mean, I absolutely believe that having a work ethic and working hard, while also balancing your mental health and your well-being is critical, you
Mm,
know. And when I go all the way back, I tell people, even when I had a paper route when I was a teenager and I had this difficult paper route, every other kid in my neighborhood had parents who drove them around. My parents would never wake up and help me. I remember you wake up and it starts off really dark, right? It's dark outside. No one else in the world is awake. Every morning, I don't know, this is just how a kid thinks. I used to wake up and hope they didn't drop the papers in my driveway, like as if some earthquake had happened and I would have a moment to rest. But every morning, those papers would end up scattered on my driveway. And I would walk outside and start that journey, which always started with putting one foot in front of the other. And there were times I walked out there crying. There were times I was freezing cold. There were times where the bag or the cart was broken. There were times where I looked across the street and saw another kid being driven around. But when I put in that hard work and that effort, the beauty of a paper route is you finish up just as the sun is rising and the
yeah.
sun would be rising, I would start to see lights start to flicker on in houses. And I would already have a feeling and a sense of accomplishment
Yeah.
because of all that work I had done. And that feeling sticks with me today, right? Like when I wake up and it's dark outside and no one else in the house is awake, I have that fortitude because I built it early in my life. And I
Mm,
know what the gratitude is that you feel after persevering. And so I just go through those same steps of waking up early, putting one foot in front of the other. And today my waking up early isn't paper sitting out there. Today I wake up and the very first thing I do is I meditate, to set my frequency right. And then I do yoga in order to set my body right, and then I drink my coffee, which is super important as well. you know. But again, by the time the rest of the household or the neighborhood wakes up and the sun is rising, I've already felt like I'm off to a great day. And I embrace that feeling. And I wish everyone could have it because people wake up hungover, people wake up without hope, people wake up without jobs and opportunities, people wake up without balance for their mental health. And so they're struggling mentally, you know,
mm,
and all those groups of people are the people that I told you I would love to speak to. And everyone doesn't listen, even if you give them the answer,
it's true.
but for that person who really cares about life and cares about living it to its fullest, these steps are things that anybody can recreate.
Mm, wow. You really took me back because I had a paper round as well. And I hadn't remembered it. Well, I must have been like between when I was 14 to 16. And I was the biggest kid. So I had the hardest paper round. Like nobody wanted to touch that one because the bag was so heavy. And it was so heavy I couldn't go on the bike. So all the kids were getting driven and on their bikes, and I'm here lugging this thing. I think it would
Oh,
have been 6'4" if it wasn't for that paper round, because I swear it kind of
Yeah, yeah.
reduced my height. But I love what you said. It used to be dark, it used to be freezing. But I'll never forget like getting my first bit of money, and it was like, wow, it was like £20 or something, or 20, maybe 25, but I think it was 20, under £20. But that was a lot of money for a kid. And I remember being
Yeah.
give my mum some of it, just so much pride I felt. And I love what you just said is it does teach you fortitude early on, that you just keep putting in the work and then you will get something, yeah, at the end of
And you
it.
get more money if you put the paper between the screen door and the door than you do if you throw it into the yard or on
Oh,
the porch. So you really learn to because it's so much easier just to throw the paper and let it
yeah,
land where it lands, but that extra step translated into extra money. And
yeah.
so I took those extra steps because I wanted the extra money. And it has such a direct correlation to the whole rest of my life. And I did do a post on it last year, and I got a picture of an old Washington Post bag, which is similar to the bag that I had, that sounds like the
Yeah,
bag you had. I almost had post-traumatic stress syndrome looking just at the picture, because I wanted the cart and I wanted the bike and I wanted the car,
yeah,
the trunk where I could just easily do the job. But, I'm grateful now in retrospect that I had it harder than a person next to me. And the truth is, I see where those people are today. And
yeah.
that's real life, right? Like, and it's not to mean that they couldn't have been successful or that that was a barrier to their success. I just know it fed into to my success in my life and
Mm,
into the person that I am on the inside.
that's so true. I used to also wish for an earthquake as well. Some mornings I'm like, God, I really can't make it through, please.
Yeah, I
And I'm
can't
like,
do it again today.
yeah,
This is, give me
that
one break, please.
the earthquake never came.
It never
But
came.
I do love what you said about it was just about the choices that you took. Like you didn't know where you were going to end up. And I would love to, what has helped you as life throws these things at you in making those choices?
Well, I think there's the external environment and then there's the internal person, right? So even as I had success with the paper route or I got through the days, there were still choices that I made that set myself back. And that's why I said my life isn't something that I saw in a movie or on a TV show. I
Mm,
lived it. It's a part of me. So, there were times I made hard choices. I dropped out of school or, I chose a different path or I chose to focus on stuff that wasn't in my education. And when those setbacks hit, I also had to learn how to respond,
mm,
and similar to what I went through with the paper route, I made choices and pivots along the way that got me back into school and got me back on track. And so one of the things I say to people is, it's never too late, right?
oh,
It's never too late. And even after having the experience in my late teens and my early 20s, I made a choice to go back to school. And when I went back to school as a young adult, I already had a kid, I was already struggling and didn't have money. I was on food stamps in the US. And I remember I had one last chance to get back into school, and I took that opportunity, which was an amnesty program that was offered by the university. And it felt like a last chance opportunity. It also felt like that one crack in the door that somebody was giving me. And I tell people I signed up for the one class I had enough money to pay for. It was a summer class. And I got two A's. I hadn't seen an A in my life since earlier in my childhood. And I got two A's, and they said, well, because you have a 4.0, you now can get a scholarship.
oh,
And they gave me a scholarship, and it paid for the classes, and it had money left over.
oh,
And I
wow.
was like, wow. I was like, no one even told me that the world worked this way. So as I started to make personal choices that were in my best interest, I also saw how the world opened up to be more than A plus B equals C, and so that led me on a path early in my academic career where I went through college and I basically just kept getting all A's because they kept giving me scholarships, which kept paying for the next semester and kept putting that extra money in my pocket, which ultimately I say I'll never forget the day I wrote the letter to the state and said, I no longer need this support, because, I'm financially able to take care of myself and my kid. And that led to me getting a degree with honors and also led to my first career opportunity.
Hmm.
And if that was the end of the story and success kind of just fluttered away and life only went on upward trajectory, it'd be one thing. But, I continued to face other big mountains in my life. And those are the experiences that I try to share with other people. The mountain may seem big in front of you, but everything that you learn in order to get over the mountain or go through the mountain or go through the mountain with a team,
Mm,
are things that have helped me to be successful. So,
Yeah. It's so interesting to hear you tell this story because, I heard a couple of things. One is just you basically took action without knowing, what the outcome would be. Like when you enrolled in that class that was the only one you could afford in the summer, and then you just did your best, you immersed yourself in it. You didn't know when you enrolled that by getting A's, you would qualify for a scholarship, right? And yet there are some people maybe who would have gotten that information or had access to that earlier on and had that informed their thinking. So it's so interesting that somehow, some way, again, going back to just putting one foot in front of the other and like just doing your best, you somehow created this momentum that led to something great, but
Yeah,
without really knowing that it would.
and we
Mm.
think it's magic, or we think only the smart people can do it, or that they're smart people and then there's the rest of us, but I'm here to tell any student that's up and coming, any young person up and coming, for me, it wasn't about being smart. It was about being hungry.
Mm.
Like that's what changed my whole paradigm. Even when I talk to my kids today and I'm telling them about working hard in their schoolwork, and they're like, but yeah, Dad, but you had a kid and you had a reason to do it. And I'm like, well, pretend, because when I went to school, it was after struggling to work to make money, and the work wasn't equaling the money I needed to live. So when I went to school, I took the same approach to school that I took to work. I said, well, I was already working 9 to 5, so I'll just go into school. And I tell people I would take classes from like 7 to 12. I would go to the library from 12 to 3. I would play basketball from 3 to 5, and then I would go pick my son up from the daycare on campus at 5 o'clock. And then I would just rinse and repeat. And so in that structure, the classes were the requirement. The library that I did from 12 to 3, that I did every day, regardless of a test, regardless of what the homework was. I made a commitment to be in there from 12 to 3, was what helped me to keep those A's going over and over and over again. And then the basketball from 3 to 5 was like, well, I can't give up everything, you know. And when I compared that to even peers of mine in school or a cousin of mine who came down with me, like first, he wouldn't go to class. And second, he would go to the student union and just stand in the student union all day long and, socialize and play, backgammon and whatever they were playing, spades and everything else. And he missed an opportunity during a key point in his life that I was able to take advantage of. And so I still had fun. I loved playing basketball. I loved it. And I did it almost every single day. I still had my friendships, but I never let it compromise the time that I had towards my academics. And I say, of course, there were always days that I just didn't follow through on my plan. But it's okay to give up a day or two here and there as long as you get back into the routine. You don't want your life to be the all day in the student union or doing those other things. You want your days to be dedicated to your craft. And whether it's Kobe Bryant talking about basketball, Denzel Washington talking about acting, you notice that most people that achieve greatness have that same attention to the details of their craft. And it may have started with the paper route, it may have started out of hunger, and again, looking back, it just looks like, oh, you knew what to do.
Yeah.
I was doing what had to be done in order to feed my child and in order to be able to make it out of the circumstances that I was in.
Yeah. S- Something that hit me as well was it wasn't just the hunger. It was almost like you also had a belief that, okay, if I go and put in, do my bit, the universe is going to help or God is going to help me out. I don't know.
Yeah,
Because you'd have to have that belief to even go and give your last, whatever money you had just to pay for this course. So I feel like you need the hunger and the belief. And when the two match, then all of a sudden, what looks like magic is actually those two just being there.
yeah,
So,
and I notice when a lot of people are struggling, people will come to me and say, "Oh, can you talk to my niece or talk to my kid?" Because they're out there doing things they shouldn't be doing. And I notice when you're in a hopeless situation, it's hard to have that hope. It's hard to believe
uh,
that taking one class is going to change your life. You're looking at money in the bank and you're like, I don't have enough to do everything that I know is required. And I'm not like the person whose parents are picking them up and driving them around with the paper out. So it is hard to take that first step sometimes and believe that ultimately it's going to end up in this long-term outcome, and I think it's important for people to see people like me who, like I said, I mean, I had to live the reality. I did have the struggles with my academics during my high school years. I did grow up in a home, that was a home of divorce. I did go through divorce myself. I did go through a period of homelessness myself. I did have a period of abuse and being abused. All those things were really a part of me. And that's why I said I carry those things with me, not because I choose to or I want them to motivate me. They're just really a part of my story. And so there's a lot of people that I relate to and
Mm.
they can probably relate to my story that probably don't know that they can be where I'm sitting, but I do believe that taking those steps, putting one foot in front of the other, and I continue to do those same things today, right?
Right.
People always ask me, are you done? Is there something else you're working towards? And outside of getting paid in a couple of weeks, I could be back in those same places. And so I still wake up today with the same fortitude that I woke up at university with. And I say, what is it that I need today? And how do I carve out those same blocks of time as if I was still, doing my undergraduate studies? And those have worked for me and helped me to get to where I am.
Wow, that is so interesting. First of all, I'm amazed at how open you are about what your journey has been, because I mean, rightfully so, society can be demanding, can be scrutinizing. And so a lot of folks, as they rise in their careers and take on more and more visible roles, sometimes do go back and kind of do this, kind of, I don't even know what the word is, but just aren't as direct or open about, what the reality of their circumstance has been and kind of sharing some of those challenges that were critical to getting to where they are today. And I know you started this conversation by saying that it's about just that one person in the audience that you might touch, but would you agree to say that for a lot of folks, it is hard to share things that are private to you in the public sphere like that, especially when you're sitting in a seat that is so public?
Yeah, I think as a CFO of a multi-billion dollar organization, people trust me with the firm's finances and the money of the firm. And I want to make sure that I establish that trust through, what I communicate and what I share. And I do think it's important that my academic records got me here, but also my ethics and integrity are what helped keep me here. And if someone takes a clip of a podcast and hears one part of it and doesn't hear the rest of the story, they may say, oh, is that person really trustworthy? But I know when I was sitting down there with my son and trying to figure out how to make life work. And the only things I thought about being were a truck driver. I wanted to be a FedEx delivery person, because I didn't see a path from where I was to where I thought my abilities could truly take me.
Mm.
And I started working in a mailroom of a law firm and I said it wasn't a summer job. I worked there for 5 years. And the whole time I was working in that mailroom, I knew I could do more. I knew I was looking at the people who were the lawyers in a law firm, and I felt like I could do what they were doing, but they were being paid significantly more. So when I started my LinkedIn journey, at first I thought I would post every week about what's happening on Wall Street, like what's happening in the economy and
Yeah.
and and the geopolitical trends. And I do post about that at times, and I posted about that when I started. But it was when I first spoke about anything that was truly authentic that I felt like I really started making an impact. And that impact just started continuing. And actually, I get back more than I put out, and so there was a reciprocal relationship being built with the LinkedIn community. And also in my leadership, I felt like my teams responded to me better when I talk to them about who I truly am versus the image of a CFO of a big law firm. And so I believe that I'm only going to be in this seat as CFO for a relatively short period of time relative to my life, right? You know, I've worked for decades, and I'll probably only sit in this seat for a decade. And so while I'm sitting in this seat, I believe it's important for me to take this opportunity to give back to others and to talk about my journey and to share with them what the path to success could look like. Because when I'm out of this seat, the next person may be that person who kind of sits there a little more buttoned up, doesn't talk about the journey. And think about all the lost talent that the world will lose because people don't have hope. You
Yeah.
know, when I look at an audience of students, I see all I see is potential. All I see is a group of students that the world needs. Every student that's sitting in university or every young person is going to contribute something to the world going forward. And we need all of their gifts and all of their talents. It doesn't matter really what their background is and what their experiences are. We need what they were created to be in order to deliver the next evolution of society and the companies that are going to exist today and in the future. And so we want to be able to bring that talent out of them, and we want to be able to share with them, you know, what I'm going to tell them I did is would help anybody, right? Like I try to read 3 books a month. I try to meditate and pray to develop my spiritual health. I work out on a daily basis in order to be physically fit. And we want that from everyone, from our mailroom workers on up to our CFOs. And so those things are applicable to to anyone who's willing to pick up the mantle and take it on like I was.
Hmm.
What's happening for you, Chinezum?
I have to. This is amazing because, but now you've hit me with so many ideas, and I'm trying to. There's two that I have in my head. It's the thing where we said about the Martin Luther King speech. If you could go up there and talk, and hope is the one word that, from what you've been talking about, which is so hard for people to keep hold of that hope. Like when I think about being in that mailroom, how you kept that hope going for 5 years. Like a lot of people be like, okay, maybe it just wasn't meant for me. So I thought if you had that Martin Luther King moment, what would you say around hope to inspire others?
You know, I think the most important thing that people need to realize is that the time is now, right? The time is now for anyone that's listening to this podcast or anyone who who may be on my LinkedIn profile or whatever. Like the time is now. Like what we can do today is important for our development and for the evolution of the society that we were just talking about. And it does start with having hope, but it also starts with taking action, right? You know, and for me, we talked about a pivotal moment being when I went back to school. And that wasn't an easy action to take. You know, I had a job, even though it wasn't paying me the money I wanted to make. I had a kid and we were eating something. And I gave all of that up in order to take a 1,200-mile drive from DC down to Mississippi and get back in school. But that single action that I took, you know, and I'll never forget getting a U-Haul. I'll never forget looking at the money in my pocket, feeling like I didn't even have enough to get gas to get down there. I remember thinking that the chance of getting into university were still very slim. But I took the action, and that's what led to all the outcomes. And today I wake up with that same passion to take action today. I could have stayed in the bed this morning instead of waking up and meditating and doing yoga. And on my last LinkedIn post, there were a lot of people who said, you know, I sleep in my workout clothes, or program my alarm clock to make sure that I get up, you know, because that requires action, right? That
Yeah.
requires real action for each of us to take. And if we don't believe, then we probably won't take the action, you know. And so it's important that when I tell you that my life is something I lived, it's not something I saw on a TV show, it's not something I heard on the radio, it's not something I read in a book. I lived it. It's a part of me. It's who I am. I'm speaking to that person who has dealt with financial insecurity, who has dealt with housing insecurity, who has dealt with food insecurity, that insecurity is what drove me to do something different than I otherwise would have done, and of course, I never want to be back at that point. And of course, I'm much further away from that point now than I was when I started the journey. But there are hundreds of thousands of people that we see every day, whether it's people being afflicted by the political environment in the US, whether it's people that are being afflicted by choices that they're making. They, like me, have to wake up tomorrow and make the right choice and take the right action.
Hmm.
And for me, I couldn't see it. I tell people, I said, even when I graduated with my degree and I knew I wanted to be a CFO, I started working jobs, and the CFO at the first two companies I was at were either Harvard graduates, or their journey was so straight and narrow, at least based on what I could see. But today people have the opportunity to use LinkedIn and other social media tools or Wikipedia to see that everybody's journey is different, and all they need to do is find two or three people who they most want to be like and just follow some of the breadcrumbs that are now left behind through the opportunities that we have to see things, and for me, even after I worked in those first two companies and I didn't see a path, and I remember me and my wife talk about it all the time. You talk about pivotal moments. I remember before I made it to the director level, I was working in a situation that wasn't ideal. I didn't know if I'd be able to get through the mountain. And at that time, I decided to wake up and pray every day. So I woke up an hour earlier than I otherwise would have. And I literally went downstairs on our couch and I prayed every day. And I did it for a month and a half. And literally, I tell you that there was a day where I finally did it and I had this peace that overcame me. And I don't care what someone's religious or spiritual beliefs are, I'm just telling you about my experience is that those steps I took gave me a peace that just surpassed all understanding. And I walked into the office that same week, and the person or the situation that seemed like a mountain had suddenly resigned and quit.
Hmm.
And I remember sitting there crying. The person thought I was crying because they were leaving, but I was crying. I know. And I let them believe that. And I kind of fed into that, but I was crying because I could not believe that this huge mountain that was in front of me had suddenly been removed. And I immediately applied for that position and I didn't get it. And I thought again, major setback. I'll never get to where I'm trying to go. I didn't get the position. And then God or life put somebody in my path and they said, these are the two or three things you need to do. And I did those two or three things after not getting that position. And they ended up hiring someone else into that position. And 3 months later, I was able to walk into the office of the CFO then and say, based on these two or three things I've been doing, I think you should promote me to that level. And he was like, well, we only have one director and you already applied for the position. I said, well, we had some conversations over the last 3 months where you gave me feedback that said it seemed like I was doing all this work. And so I said, I want to be promoted to director. And long story short, he ended up promoting me to director within that 3 month period, ended up paying me more money than I would have gotten had I gotten it 3 months earlier. And that ended up being a pivotal moment in my career. And I'd say the two things that helped me there was one, that prayer, and two, keeping hope when hope didn't seem possible and taking the action steps that somebody gave me. And it really did. And it seems so clear in retrospect, but I'm telling you, at the time, it seemed like almost like we had this mentality sometimes like my career is over. I'll never make it, you
Hmm.
know, and those steps really were steps I didn't know to take myself that came to me through the spiritual work I was doing and also the other person who gave me those action steps.
Hmm.
That is so incredible. Like that story was it's such a powerful, powerful memory that you just shared with our audience. And and just so appreciative because most of our audience are, senior executives in different industries across different major global markets who really believe in delivering high quality results, but also being well, being mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually well. So it's just incredible when you share moments like that. And thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I couldn't help but think about that person who was sort of the other part of what came together, right? You had the prayer, which was you internally, that spiritual growth, and then that individual who took you aside and said, hey, do these two things. I remember seeing a post a couple of months ago where you were getting an award, or you were being celebrated for just your impact and all of the ways that you contribute to others growing and being uplifted. How do you do that? Like, how is it that, because there's only but so many hours in the day, how is it that and I went and the comments, there was been like 100+ comments. Everyone was like, he did the same with me. Like and I was reading through and I was like, wow, look at that legacy that you're creating, separate and apart from who you are and your beliefs and how you live through day to day. But it's so powerful, it's so inspiring. Like, how do you find the energy to like pour into others in the way that you do?
And I just wanted to add, EJ, I'm glad because I was going to go there as well. And I love when you say when you pray and you have to have that faith, but when God or whoever in the universe moves, it's through other people. So I just love that EJ said that. So I'd love to learn, how did you build this ecosystem and how do you keep giving and creating it?
Yeah, and I love what you said about the awards and the comments. Remember, I said LinkedIn gives me back 10 times more than I ever put out there. And I still think a lot before I post, especially the more vulnerable I am. It's sometimes even when I'm writing it or pushing send, I'm like, ah, like, do I really want to say this? Or do I even want to put something out there that says I got an award? But I do it not for myself. I do it for the people who are trying to find that hope. And these awards that I've gotten, from universities that I attended, from organizations that I supported, have for me just been so outsized compared to what I felt like I gave, and yet they feel like a rewarding of all the work that's been done, and I'll never forget that same school that I mean, they gave me amnesty, Mississippi State University, to go back to the school. They gave me that scholarship that helped me to feed my kid and to get my first career job. They gave me a place to live because they had family housing that allowed for a single parent to bring his kid. They had a daycare on campus. So I felt like they gave so much to me. And when they gave me an award last year, they gave me the Leo Seal, award, which is like the highest award in the College of Business. And interesting enough, the year before, I had taken my wife to the university for the first time, and I showed her the Leo Seal award winners. And I said, look back here in 1996. The Leo Seal Award was actually given to the CEO of the company that hired me for my very first career job. And they hired me because he was on campus speaking for that award. And he met me as a student and said he wanted to bring more diversity to this Mississippi cottonseed company. And I told her, I said, all these award winners, and I look back all the way to 1996, and the only name I recognize is that person that hired me. And I took a picture of the names that had been on there going back to mid 40s or something to today. And I told her, I said, one day I want my name to be on this award. I said, one day I want a Black man's name to be on that plaque in Mississippi. And we took a picture and we dreamt about it. And the person who got the award in 1996 had donated a building, like, and I was thinking, I have to get to the point where I could donate a building, you know. And as fortune would have it, not thinking about the award or anything, the next year I called the new dean of the school and I just offered to him my services. I said, you're a new dean. I'm a former student. Just wanted to let you know that I'm out here. I'm all the way in Washington, D.C., but I want to give back to the university. And I said, I don't have a lot of money. I said, but I want to give my time. I want to let you know I'm available. And he was a new dean. He was in his first 2 months in a job. And I told him my story. I told him my whole story. And the lady on the call said, yes, we need to bring him back here to talk to the students. And the dean, who was new, said, no, I think we need to bring him back here to talk to more than the students. We need to have him talk to students, parents, and the community. And he says, as a matter of fact, we have this award. And he looked at the lady and said, I think I can give that award to anybody I want, right? And she said, yes. He says, I want you to come down here and be the Leo Seal Award. And literally, this was 1 year to almost to the date after I took the picture. I couldn't even believe it. I still didn't believe it until they sent me the letter the next week. And I showed it to my wife, and we had the date of that letter, and we had that picture that I took. And so when I stood down there and got that award, I received it as someone who had walked down to that campus with his young 3-year-old son, who was on food stamps, who had struggled academically before. Everything that I had lived came to bear in that moment. And I just believe my name being on that plaque from now to perpetuity represents hope for anyone who wants to believe. You don't have to donate a building. You don't have to necessarily be the CEO. And you definitely can come from a diverse background or underrepresented background. Simply because I picked up the phone and called him and offered to talk to students, it led to that outcome.
Wow.
And I can tell you similar stories for the other awards that you see on there or the comments that came back. It starts with a willingness to me to take action and also to help others to provide hope that they otherwise wouldn't see. And I think I'm uniquely qualified because of my experiences to help people who come from underrepresented groups or who may be lacking that hope.
Mm.
Oh my goodness. Just such a clear sense of purpose that you have. And it's so interesting because, the world is so noisy, especially this year. I mean, we're just wrapping up Q1. This is such a noisy time to be in the world. And it seems so chaotic and so many competing priorities. And it's just hearing you talk about how you live day to day, it brings so much clarity and and structure and simplicity to just living out your purpose, and using your gifts in a way that is impactful. That I just the timing of this conversation couldn't be any better to share something like this.
Yeah, and you asked earlier, how do you make time? And I go back to the paper route or to my time in school. It's not, we all have the same 24 hours in a day. And I will go to my grave telling people who, in case they doubt it in any way, I do sleep at night.
That was the next question. Are you sure?
Yeah,
You said
Are
three
you
hours?
sure?
Or-
I do sleep at night.
What
I
time do you
do.
wake up?
Yeah, I wake up. There's a book called The 5 a.m. Club. And I have it sitting over here somewhere, and I gave it to all my kids. And I'll talk if you ask me a question later about the 5 a.m. club. But, I do sleep, I do make time for family, and I do still play basketball and exercise and have fun, But I believe we all have the same time in a day. And I believe that you need to wake up every day and understand what your purpose is to be on this earth. And if you don't take the time to figure that out, then I feel like you lose the opportunity, right? We all have seen, all this. You can scroll TikTok or you can scroll Facebook or you can do this. There's enough distractions in the world, or you can get focused on CNN and what they're saying about the president of the United States. And all those to me are distractions from my primary purpose in life. And my clarity was helped by being a single parent early in my life. I talked about some of the struggles of dropping out, of working in the mailroom. I had a sister who was murdered at an early age in Silver Spring, as a matter of fact, or Tacoma Park. I had a brother who committed suicide. These lived experiences help me understand that life is short and it's important what I do with the time that I have here on earth. And so I often, even on LinkedIn or through other things, I tell people, right now my phone's not ringing. I will take a call from any young person or any student. I will do a podcast if someone asks me to do a podcast because I prioritized it as a way and an opportunity for me to give back. And as long as I have breath in my lungs to breathe, and as long as I have time, and there's always pockets of time, I try to make time, or I prioritize making time to give to others because, again, it gives back to me. But I also remember what it was like when I was sitting there coming up. And I didn't have a CFO that was willing to talk to me. And I didn't have a leader who was vulnerable and authentic. I didn't have necessarily, every program that I wanted to help me, whether it was help me because I was a single parent, help me because I was a graduate, or help me because I was a young manager trying to get director. A lot of those programs actually are hard to get into, right? They go to the elite of the elite. They say they'll show on the news someone got 20 million or $1 million in scholarships, but that person has like the highest GPA ever. They said no to 90 of those scholarships and only kept the one. I'm like, where's the leftover money? I mean, my kids need scholarships. I needed a scholarship. Um, and things that generally come to you that are gifts generally come long after you felt like you wanted it or needed it,
Yeah.
and so you
Yeah.
have to learn to be patient and take life on life's terms because that path for me to get that scholarship in school came maybe 3 or 4 years after I was and I always wonder how vulnerable to be, but I had been evicted from my first school. I didn't have money to pay for it, and I remember wishing I had it back then. But it actually came at a better time when I was older, hungrier, in a better position to actually handle my academics. And I'm grateful that it came when it came. There was just a 5 year window in between where I was like, I didn't know what life was going to have for me, right?
Yeah.
But that time when I drove down to Mississippi, it was right after my sister had been murdered. It was right after I had worked in the mailroom for 5 years. I was starting to see other people graduating who were in my beginning class, and I wanted to catch up. I wanted to be where I thought, life where I thought I was supposed to be. And I was willing to work harder that time around than I was the first time around. And
Mm.
I had more answers. And I think we got to start telling people, some of the answers to life, right? Some of where those pockets of opportunity may be.
Hmm. Something's hit me. What you said is the patience. It's very hard to have the patience, but the universe or God knows when that right time is. But it's hard to keep that patience, especially when you're going through it. That's something that's tough to hang on to.
Yes. So I wanted to talk about one last pivotal moment because it was a very important part of my career journey. And I was a director of finance, and I had been a director for a few years. And the next step after director was CFO. And I had applied for a few CFO positions and I hadn't gotten them. And I walked into the office of my CFO and asked him for career advice. And he said, well, I think you're going to be a CFO one day. He said, but it's about 5 years out, And I looked at him and I said, well, my timeline, since I'd already been interviewing, has it about 1 year out. And he was like, oh, I think you need to do some work and do some things. He said, in about 5 years, it'll be fine for you. And I walked out of his office and I said to myself, well, what do I do with this information? And again, I don't know how it came to me or what came to me, but one of the things that came to me was to hire an executive coach. And the reason I hired that executive coach was because I had done everything I knew to do. I was working hard. I put in the years of service or whatever. So my resume said I had the requisite number of years. I had gotten an undergraduate degree, an advanced degree, and another advanced degree. So I had the academic credentials and I didn't know what else to do. And I hired this executive coach and I had a choice. I remember with going with this black executive coach or this other person who was of a different background completely and who wasn't as kempt and put together. And I don't know why. I think I chose this other person just because of location. And I don't want to say how he presented himself because he might listen to this one day, but I didn't know what I was going to learn from him. But there were two things that were pivotal that he did that really helped me. One is his approach was completely different. And I just had to trust his approach, right? He was much more like guru centric than tactical and telling me what to do. But the other thing he did was he did a 360-degree survey of me and gave me the feedback in a way that I had never seen it presented before. Because I had had reviews and other feedback sessions, et cetera. And what he presented was a wheel of characteristic traits and he had the feedback charted on the wheel. And I was looking at all the areas. I was like a 9 out of 10. I was like a 9 out of 10. I was like a 9 out of 10. And then there were these other areas at the top of the wheel that where I wasn't as high. I wasn't high at all, matter of fact. And it's interesting because the ones up here were down here were like works hard and gets the job done and does all these things. And the ones up here were like integrity, authenticity.
Ooh.
And I was like, I'm the most I'm the person with the highest integrity that you'll ever meet. I teach Sunday school. I'm honest. I'm this. Uh, and what he said to me was, these skills down here that you've developed, they're what got you to where you are. They're very manager and director led. It's about getting the job done. But these up here are what it takes to be a leader. And if you ever want to make it to CFO, we have to pull these ones that are at the bottom up to the top. And I was humbled by the feedback, embarrassed by it, if I'm being honest. But I started taking the action and the work that he said to get that integrity and authenticity and the other things that were at the top of the chart. And the number one thing I remember most from there was he said, when you meet with your team, you cannot go in there telling them about all the things that need to be done. You need to start your meetings and lead your meetings in a way where they get to know who you are. And so it flipped my meeting structure on its head, where instead of spending the whole meeting talking about what we need to get done, people on my team will tell you. Now I start every meeting with, where are you? Where am I today? And if we spend 55 minutes talking about where we are and 5 minutes talking about the tasks that need to be done, to me, that's a successful meeting. And when I started doing that, the things started moving closer to the top. And I promise you, 1 year later, I was a CFO of a law firm. 1 year later, I walked into the office of that CFO without prompting him, without telling him about the executive coach and all the steps we took. 1 year later, I walked into his office. He said, I think you're ready to be a CFO now, and I'm going to start to send you the job opportunities that come to me that I think you may want to pursue.
Wow.
And again, it was just one of those moments. I had no idea. I trusted more in his assessment of 5 years than I did in what I wanted, you know. But when I took the action first and I started to see the gaps that I couldn't see in myself before, and I did the work, it was amazing the outcome that came out of that.
Hmm. I just want to say for our listeners, we did not pay William to say that because we're both executive coaches. We didn't pay him. He doesn't even
Yeah,
For that. He's just speaking about his own lived experience and
that
how
is
pivotal
definitely, you know.
that role was for
I
him.
do.
Incredible.
Me and EJ always question this is most people would have come out of that room and gone, okay, it's going to take me 5 years. Let's just keep at it. But something inside of you was like, I've got to do something different. What what sparked that?
So there's two things I would say to that. One is, as a CFO now, I'm always looking for the next person that's going to step into my seat. And I think there are a lot of people who report to me who just think it's their next step. But what I really do is I look deeper into the organization and I actually look for people who are doing the work. And I tell people often, I actually spot the people who have the potential to be my next CFO 2 or 3 levels down because of the work they're doing on themselves, the work they're doing to help others, the leadership qualities that they show, the sacrifices that they make in terms of what they do in their personal life, and I work on developing my direct reports because I do want someone to step into the seat after I'm gone. But leadership can come from anywhere in the organization. And often people don't understand what their gaps are in order to get them into the seat. But the other thing I did that you said, what made me do it when I came out of the room, and I'll go back to the one of the earlier things I said to you. I'm hungry. I'm as hungry today as I was when I was on food stamps. It's not an insatiable appetite for power. It's not an insatiable appetite for status. It's I just wake up hungry. I want to see what more life has to offer me. I've seen so many doors open for me to things that I otherwise wouldn't see. Access to rooms, rooms I didn't know exist. I tell people I'm still sitting in airport lounges and I'm the only person of color there, or there's very few people of color. And I see what access to those rooms does for me and what it does for my family, for my wife, for my children, for my extended family and the people around me. I believe there are other doors that I've still yet to walk through. Like, and I don't think that's just some thing I say to myself. I truly believe there are other doors out there that I haven't walked through,
Mm.
and I want to see what's behind those doors. I'm hungry to see what that walking through those doors will do for me personally, not money wise or status wise, just what they'll do to edify my whole being. And I'm also curious as to what they'll do for my wife and for my children and for my extended family. Because, and I was sharing this with someone on a call earlier. I said, when I was young, you have all these choices to make. And there are a lot of friends of mine who chose to continue their use of illicit drugs and other things. And so they've had to work jobs and stuff that don't drug test them and don't, question what they do. And I say, I often wonder if they understand that the gap of where they are and where they could be is so great. And if you had to quantify it in math, like they may be making $100,000 when they could be making $1 million. And if they knew what they were really giving up to use those drugs or to do those things, would they make those same trade-offs? You
Yeah.
know, and I want to be clear when I say this because people think somehow because you're in a C-suite or because you're in a corporate job, you give up your freedom of life. And, I don't want to be tied to the man or I don't want to be tied to whatever, freedom is different for different people. But I would argue that my life today is much more free and has many more freedoms than it did when I was working in the mailroom. It absolutely does. And I live it, I experience it. And so I wake up today hungry to grow so I can see what's behind those other doors, and I want to open those doors for my children, for my children's children, for my legacy in life. Um, and then going back one last thing, and then I'll turn it back over. We talk about Martin Luther King, and I'm not a historian, and I think we've all seen clips on TV and other things. But the thing that sticks out with me is all he did was open his mouth and talk. It was the crowds that came, right? Like he didn't pay them to come. He didn't, he was 38, 39 years old. And he's just standing up, sharing his own story and his own journey, and the crowds came. And so you never really can truly understand the impact you can make on the world unless you're first willing to open your mouth and speak. and then to see what comes. And I'm not willing to make trade-offs for that. I'm curious as to what more is out there, what people need to hear, want to hear, what'll change lives. Because I believe that that's truly, each of us has a purpose in that to some degree. And I know it's my purpose. I know it's, otherwise I went through all of that stuff just to be beaten up and, and tossed around, you know. So,
Oh,
My goodness. I love the point you make about how you have to define what freedom means for you. I think that is such a big point because sometimes you get wrapped up in what you were taught, or what you see others doing, or what you used to believe before. You're not even updating it for yourself to match where you are right now. So it's just this reminder that it's an ongoing process. And that's the only thing that will enable you to really know, am I focused on the right things? And I love the second point around trade-offs because the example you used about the illicit drugs is a good one because, there's such clarity around what you lose as a result of doing that. But people are making trade-offs every day and not realizing how a compounding effect happens and they're this far from what they actually want to be, right? And so like it's so interesting. You could replace illicit drugs with almost anything. The question is,
yeah.
do you understand what that trade-off is? And are you ready to kind of handle the consequences of that? Like when you're making your choices. And I just really love that point. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to just throw that out there. That stuck with me.
I,
Yeah,
I
you,
was, I was just going to say, yeah, that's the trade-off one was the one that hit me because I think very few people do that 360. Because if you can actually show them, like, if you carry on doing this, this is the cost, this is the consequence. And I think people never do it. They just carry on, and then they don't actually realize their potential that they're freely just throwing out the window and giving up. But what really hit me of what you said was your purpose, where you get your hunger from, is to just get access to these doors. Because me and EJ are now realizing, especially when you're a person of color, when you're from a diverse background, you just don't even realize the doors are even there. And recently, about a week ago, we've been trying to like get access to decision makers. And it was just, we went to an event and somebody just sat next to us and was like, oh, by the way, I'm going to this thing in Annapolis, blah, blah, blah. And we were just, okay, let's see if we can get tickets. And when we got there, we're like, like we know, like A, we didn't even know this thing was happening near our house.
No idea. Right
B,
near our house, 10 minutes
yeah,
from our house. We had
we've been
no
there trying
idea.
to like, oh, let's go to Los Angeles, let's go here, like, but literally 10 minutes from my house. And then the people we spoke to us, we both said I've never been to any kind of event or conference where every single decision maker is wanting to talk to you, really engaging. So when you said that, it just hit me in that that's the purpose to because we have kids as well. There's so many doors we don't even know about, and it's not about money. Money is good, like definitely you want financial security, but to give everybody that access is something, especially if you're from a diverse background. I think we owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our children, our community to make sure that we start finding where these doors are and we tell others about it and give them that access. So thank you for sharing.
yeah. I mean, sometimes I wish I could just gift it to everyone, because a lot of times when I'm sitting up in a nice hotel or getting driven around by a driver, I feel like it's, like I could do with less, and how do I gift this to other people? But I wanted to go back to the trade-off thing because I don't want to leave people with the thought that we're only talking about, like you said, illicit drugs or other things. And one of the things that I do is like I like to watch sports, and my son likes to watch sports, and a lot of people like to watch sports, but sports can take up a long period of time, right? Like it's like, I watch an NBA game, it's 3 hours long, it's got commercials and timeouts and fouls.
Yeah.
And so, and it sounds like such a simple solution, and everyone does some version of this. But instead of watching a game from 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., because then I can't wake up at 5 a.m., I watched the YouTube version that just takes out the timeout and files and puts the game in 20 minutes, and I get to watch it from beginning to end. And I got to go through all kinds of things so that I don't wake up and see the end score before I watch the YouTube clips. know, but you develop a pattern that fits in and allows you to do the other things. So now I have more time to read my books, to take additional classes, to help out others because I'm not spending 3 hours pinned in front of TV. And a lot of times I'll watch those shows or Netflix shows while I'm on the treadmill or on my Peloton bike, and that's just another way that I found that I can accomplish two goals at the same time while not having to make those freedom sacrifices or big trade-offs that people often feel like you have to make.
Hmm. That's
That was a
cool.
good one.
William,
Conversation is so great. I know we're at time. This was right, Janelle, but this
Yeah, we're going to
conversation,
edit it down. We'll clean it up.
there's nothing to edit in this conversation. Are you kidding, Lily? Every minute of this conversation was so riveting and insightful and real. That was awesome.
William, I can't thank you enough. You really have inspired definitely both of us. You shared so deeply and your stories. It's just what we needed at this moment. So thank you.
I
Thank
feel
Well, like
fired
I
up.
said,
you.
I'll get back more than I give out, but I'm grateful that you guys even reached out and that we were able to find the time. I appreciate the work you're doing. I look forward to following it and seeing kind of where your journey takes you. And I hope we can have a chance to meet face to face,
We would
and
really love that because I didn't even realize you're in DC. So we definitely
Oh,
want
that'd be great.
a chance to have a coffee or lunch or anything. That would be great.
yeah, that'd be fantastic.
There is one question I just like, if you could, just one thing you want to leave with our listeners, it could be to what we just talked about, or it could be to help with their mental fitness. What would you choose?
Yeah, I think is to have a plan, right? To not just wake up and hope that things will work out or hope that someone will give you something,
Mm,
to have a plan that works for the journey that you're on, whatever your journey may be. And for me, my plan is rooted in a few basic things. Is one is always making sure that I stay mentally sharp. And so for that, I tell people I read 3 books a day. I continue to sign up for classes at university. I continue to try to go grow myself, even though I don't see myself as an academic in any way. I just believe that it's important that you figure out a way to keep yourself mentally sharp. And then we talked about the spiritual part. Again, whatever your faith is, having a plan around your spiritual growth is important. And for me right now, it's about, me and my wife are working on the Bible in 1 year plan. We make a commitment to church and to fellowship, and I continue to use meditation as another tool to set my frequency right. And then physical, I mean, just I, life is short and I just want to live the longest life I can. And people often, like, I don't think I'm a workout junkie. I don't necessarily want to go in the gym and lift heavy weights, but I do make sure I move every single day, whether it's making sure I get 10,000 steps, whether it's riding my Peloton bike, whether it's running on a Peloton treadmill. And right now, I've set a journey for myself to do 365 days of yoga, and I'm not a yogi and I've never done yoga like this. And,
yeah.
I'm on like, my sixth or seventh week of daily yoga. And for me, it's just giving my body a try. It's something that I've always said I have a problem with flexibility and my frequency, making sure I'm balanced as I start the day. And so I have a plan. And if I don't make the plan, I'm not going to beat myself up, but I do have a plan.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
have a life plan.
I love that. EJ?
I'm speechless. I'm gonna have to go and rewatch this.
Uh,
Just so
I
many.
could have talked to you guys for another couple hours,
You were so
me
amazing.
too. We could have carried it.
Yeah,
That was great.
yeah. There's so many things we didn't even get to, but I do appreciate your time and the work you guys are doing to give back to the community. And I do think that we can find additional ways to collaborate.
oh,
Oh,
would love that.
amazing.
Absolutely be an honor for us.